Okay, so remember that third change in my voice. This video is about Genesis 10, the table of the nations. Now think about who sits at what seat at the table. That's brought up in the New Testament by Christ as a character in the story. Now there's a lot of wordplay here that we're not going to go over. It tells you what you know already to some degree in a way that makes you mad. It has to do with AIDS, believe it or not, HIV, the Hivites. It has to do with the Archites, the Ark, the Sinites, the sin. There's a lot of stuff like that, and there's a lot of different ways to kind of put it together. But I found with this particular wordplay that you're better off just thinking things through and organizing your thoughts, looking at the facts, and organizing them correctly, and considering what I say. Obviously, I'm telling you the truth, and I'm directing you in the way that you should go. And I'm the one God set apart to direct you in the way that you should go. Pretty straightforward. So there's all kinds of stuff that has to do with who's sleeping with who and how they want them to sleep with them and all kinds of horrible stuff like this. And so we're going to go ahead and skip that. So the main takeaway from this chapter has to do with Cush and Nimrod in verse 8 and verse 9 and in verse 10. Okay. Everything else is more or less not so important. So let's go through this. This is the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons, who themselves had sons after the flood. The Japhethites. The sons may mean successors or descendants or nations. Keep in mind that people are judged as groups and as individuals. Okay, what group you yoke yourself to, what have you. The sons of Japheth. Remember, Japheth refers to, at first glance, the simple answers, it refers to whites and Asians and Native Americans. However, people are mixed with various genes, and the spirit is everything, the flesh means nothing. But to help you understand, that's what it's referring to, and the center is really in Europe for the most part, right? But it also, there's Eurasia, there's overlap. They also cover them to some degree, okay? And of course, the black people migrated various places. It gets a little complex, but that's the simple answer. Now, what is the determinant? Well, it's what people yoke themselves to. If you see quite often Asians do pretty well in society in terms of, getting good grades, getting a lot of money, being accepted, it's because their cultures are very similar to white people, right? There's white people that's why so many white people do martial arts, right? There's white people who are very concerned with science. There's Asians who are very concerned with science. They're like the main scientists in our society here in America. So that has to do with how Japheth thinks and how the school system's been structured to favor how Japheth thinks. That's one reason I'm right. And with Native Americans, they slaughtered a lot of them. They brought them down to a large degree, sabotaging them, just treated them really, really bad. So we don't see a lot of, and there's not a lot of them to begin with, right? And their exact kind of social circumstances made it so that they don't pronounce themselves a certain way. So we don't have a good feel for how Native Americans think. And also they're mixed to a large degree, and quite often they have the patriarchal lines of other groups, so that makes it more complicated. So let's get into this here. Japheth, right? The sons of Japheth. Gomer, Magog. Remember, Gog and Magog lead the charge against the righteous in Armageddon. Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer, again, going back, this is all Japheth's line. Ashkenaz, right? Also very significant group, right? These Ashkenazi Jews, for example. Riphath and Togarmah. The sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, the Kittites, and the Rodanites, or Dodanites. From these, the maritime peoples spread out into their territories by their clans, with their nations, each with its own language. Okay, now we see things like maritime admiralty law, and they refer to these people as the maritime people. There's some connection, I'm sure that this is contested to some degree, but there's some connection with the sea people. And the Romans, right, row your boat, right? There's certain connections there. Some people somewhat contest them, but they're not really contested that much, right? If we look at the history of it, the Greeks and their ships, their armada, the Romans, the colonialism, it's pretty safe to say they're maritime people, right? The Vikings, it's pretty safe to say that a lot of these European groups were maritime groups. Okay. The Hamites, the sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt, also known as Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Put is also known as Libya. And Canaan is the land where the Israel takes over. So when they say cursed on you, Canaan, it's foreshadowing to some degree. There's no real curse there because lots of hardship happened to a lot of people, but Israel eventually takes the land of Canaan. Okay, and that's not a coincidence, right? These are the sons of Ham. So as they take the lands of Canaan and they're worshiping these other deities and they're learning the ways, again, that's why Hebrew is an Afro-Asiatic language, right? Abraham was in a land run by the Hamites, and the Jews would eventually, they go to Egypt, which is from the Hamitic line, and they eventually go to Canaan, which is from the Hamitic line. So it's very much a black story when you think about the culture, the spirit. Well, you'll see what I mean shortly. The sons of Cush: Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Sabteka. The sons of Ramah: Sheba and Dedan. Again, Sheba, right? The queen of Sheba. The queen of Sheba and King Solomon. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. This is why it says, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. Notice it does not say anything like this about Japheth. So, as you're getting the table of the nations, who are these people? What are they doing? What are they about, right? It says that these guys, these Japhethites, they like to get in boats and go places and settle down, and they're in Iceland and they're in various places, right? Scandinavia, they're in England, they're all over Europe and Asia. And over time, right, because they're maritime people, they find their way across the ocean, island hopping to some degree. Some people argue ice bridges, and they find their way to the Americas. Okay, now, there's also, some people might argue that at what time does this occur? Okay, that it's talking about the people that's in the known world. But you got to look at genetics, right? Who's related to who? So regardless of the time it's talking about, who's more related to who lives by who, where do people migrate, how do they migrate there, and what group do they fall into? You see what I'm saying? Okay. So, the first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Calneh in Shinar. Now, Shinar is said to be Babylonia. So, Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, Calneh, and Shinar. And you hear things in history like Sargon of Akkad, of the Akkadians. Okay? And so, these are people who were under the rule of the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order is the simple explanation here. Okay, when we're looking at direct explanation, how do we explain this? How do we translate this? What are they trying to say? They're trying to say that, yes, these martial art Africans are the main people in the ancient world at this time. They're the most impressive. They're the ones God set apart to lead. This is extremely important here, because when we get to Abraham and his covenant with God, you'll see how it's not what you think it is. Okay, the covenant wasn't for the Jews to inherit the world. Neither was the covenant with Noah. Okay, the covenant was for the righteous. And they're using a certain language. Again, remember in Revelation, they talk about the peoples and nations and multitudes and languages. They're using a certain language that is designed to favor the people who wrote the story. Okay, is the simple answer. The people either the people who wrote the story, or the people they wrote the story for, first and foremost, because they're in a certain place when they're writing the Torah. They're in a certain place when they're writing the Bible. When John the Revelator wrote Revelation, he was locked up in a prison in Patmos with all these Greeks around him, whoever else, and they're around him, and they're looking at him, and they're watching him, and he's writing a certain way in code. And that's very important for you to understand that. So Bill is somebody who's like a goon who feels bad about what he's doing to some degree, something to this effect. So he's lying to save his own skin because Baal is evil. But again, Bible by Baal, Babel. He's trying to confuse things because he also wants to, for various reasons, they also want to encode the truth in the story for his descendants for various reasons. Also, you have to consider that if Ham was magically cursed, then why did he bring about Cush, who brought about Nimrod, who rises above everyone else? And he not only is the greatest martial artist at the time, which is better than running the greatest empire, but he establishes the greatest empire. And throughout the Bible, Babylon is known as Babylon the Great. Okay, and then it falls. That's important to note. And when we look at Nebuchadnezzar, for example, from Babylon, he's named after Nebo, who's a deity of science, a pagan deity of science. So he worships Nebo and Bel, okay, but they were responding to the Royal African Falcon martial art order when they build the tower, and we'll get into that in the next chapter. So, okay. Also remember that Christ is a character in the story when he's talking to his disciples, said that the secrets of the kingdom of heaven have been given to you and not to other people, right? He said there's these secrets that have been given to you. Now, part of the reason why is that Shem and Japheth and their pagan descendants, right? Their spirits, their descendants, their peoples are there, and they, they don't want to hear that the divine order is a Royal African Falcon martial order, right? They're in the Roman Empire. They're in the region of the Jews, Judea, what have you. They go to Jerusalem. He's from Bethlehem and, Nazareth and so on and so forth. He's in this area that's run by these Romans who are very argumentative, right? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? Imagine if he said, hey, Caesar is not chosen. It's a Royal African Falcon martial order, not his line. Then Caesar, the soldiers would have hit the roof, as they say. They would have been very mad. Okay. You'll see that I'm right here. I think that most of you understand that I'm right when you hear me say the way, the truth, and the life. What are the facts here? What are the nature of people, right? Who's the real hero group of people, right? Who is comparable to Martin Luther King and Mandela and even Malcolm X, right? Who's comparable to me and my father, who brought me into this world, right? Nobody from other groups are, not other black people, no one from other races. That we see that is the case, and that's part of the history. It's not racist to point it out. It is the story here, because we're reading about the Table of Nations. Is it racist for them to say that Nimrod became a mighty warrior on the earth and not to say that about anyone else in the Table of Nations? Okay, no. These are the facts here. And when they try to confuse the facts, we have to make them straight. The way is the truth. And those who don't like the truth, like I've been saying for years, if the truth destroys you, then you should be destroyed. And the truth will set you free. But if you're such a demon that you can't be set free, then you should be destroyed by the truth. From that land, he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh. Now, keep in mind the Assyrians and the Babylonians, these massive and these powerful empires. Just like we see with the Indus Valley Empire in India, right? It's not a coincidence. There's a connection between them and Ethiopians. And we see in Greece and Rome, and it's on the Mediterranean, right? It's by these black people. It's by Egypt, which was the first really impressive empire that taught them, the other ones, to be empires as well. Okay, so it's that, it's Mizraim / Egypt. It is Cush, who we got Nimrod. It's from Ham that we get the empires of the world, that we get the Royal African Falcon martial art order, that we get the true kings of all of humanity. Okay, the story is saying that as well, but it's in a coded manner. Keep in mind that, for example, that Moses learned in the household of the Egyptians, and he took a Cushite wife. Not only did he learn from Ham's offspring, Mizraim, Egypt, okay, and their royal family, he also took a Cushite wife, and Cush is a descendant of Ham. And also we see in Numbers 12, it says that Miriam and Aaron were cursed with leprosy for objecting to it. And that's God saying, give the black man and the black woman their rightful place. That's the message, that's the moral of the story. Okay, from that land he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Riboth, or Nineveh, and Calah and Rezin, which is between Nineveh and Calah, which is the great city. Egypt was the father of the Ludites, Anamites, Leabites, Nephtutites, Pathrusites, Casluites, from whom the Philistines came, and Caphtorites. Now notice it says that the great warrior before the Lord wasn't the offspring of Egypt, but was the offspring of Cush. Just like these African people, these black people have been saying that the ancient Egyptians, the ones who founded Egypt, the ones who really gave it its culture, were black. And there's a lot of racist people who have been saying, no, they were whites. I even heard people say they're Jews or they're Asians, because they don't want to admit the implications of that. And that has implications on the translation of the Bible as well. And you see people faking artifacts and fabricating evidence and so on and so forth. Okay. Canaan was the father of Sidon, his firstborn, or of the Sidons, the foremost, and of the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, Hivites, Archites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and Hamathites. Now keep in mind that The Hittites, right, where I believe it was a Hittite that King David sent off to die because he wanted his wife Bathsheba because he saw her bathing. So there's interesting connections here to various points in the story. But even if you don't make those connections, as long as you understand, this is a great example of if you understand the nature of people, right? That shows kind of the nature of some of these Jewish people who are into the porn industry, they're bankers, they're into pharmaceuticals, they're in various unsavory positions in society, abusing their power. And that's part of the story as well. So why does that happen? What is the nature of people who move in certain spirits, right? That's part of the explanation of the Bible, whether you think it's racist or not, whether you like it or I like it or not, that's part of what it's saying here. Okay. Later the Canaanite clans scattered, and the borders of Canaan reached from Sidon toward Gerar, as far as Gaza, then towards Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham by their clans and languages. So it doesn't make it clear whether, I've seen maps and I forgot what it looked like, but it doesn't make it clear whether, it's not so important whether Sodom and Gomorrah is in the borders of Canaan, right? Because it says it goes as far as Gaza, then towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and then it says Admah, so I don't know exactly where all these places are. It's not that important. It doesn't change the core message, right? It's not my job to know everything that there ever was. And these things in the Bible connect to so many things and so many histories. It's not my job to know. Okay, these are the sons of Ham by their clans and languages, in their territories and nations. Okay, so Nimrod, again, is blend words and Amrod, right? David and Amrod. The top martial arts language is key here. This is how it must be accounted for, with Nimrod basically referring to a certain kind of Igbo expression. Now, why Igbos? Because it has to do with, you know them by their works, right? Who is like him? We see the Bible say things like, who is like him? Who can proclaim the mighty acts of God? Right? Because they're worthy and they're trustworthy. And that goes back to this specific tribe, a faction of this specific tribe, and I'm the last one who can ever really represent God after my flesh dies. We'll get to that with the Ham, right? We'll get to that. The Semites. Okay. Sons were also born to Shem, whose older brother was Japheth. Shem was the ancestor of all the sons of Eber. The sons of Shem, Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, and Meshach. See 1 Chronicles 1:17, Hebrew, Mash. Arphaxad was the father of Shelah. Septuagint says the father of Canaan with an I, Cainan. And Canaan was the father of Shelah, who was the father of Eber. The two sons were born to Eber. One was named Peleg. Peleg means division, because in his time the earth was divided. His brother was named Joktan. Joktan was the father of Amodad, Shilep, Hazar, Maveth, Jirah, Hadaram, Uzal, Diklah, Obal. Okay, notice it says Diklah, right? In La is a moon deity in Egypt, also known as Jah and Yah. And then right after that says Obal, right? Obile, right? Obile, Diklah, right? So they're trying to get things to go a certain way. Sheba, right? Ba can mean soul. Sheba, right? Ophir, we see that in Psalm 45, right? The gold of Ophir. In the woman that is desired by the most excellent of men, which is the top martial arts ever, right? The mighty one, the mighty warrior, New Living Translation, what have you. Havilah and Jobab, all these were sons of Joktan. The region where they lived stretched from Mesha towards Sephar in the eastern hill country. These are the sons of Shem by their clans and languages and their territories and nations. These are the clans of Noah. These are the clans of Noah's sons according to their lines of descent within their nations. From these, the nations spread out over the earth after the flood. Now, let's go back to Ophir real quickly here, because it proves my point about Genesis 10, 8 through 10. So in Psalm 45, again, it says she has the gold of Ophir, and the gold can refer to wisdom. So it's this woman who's wise enough to choose the right guy, and she's beautiful inside and out, and the king desires her beauty inside and out. It's kind of like a flower, right? A flower is beautiful inside and out, right? So we see that the most excellent of men, again, I can't stress this enough, see Psalm 45, 1 through 5 or so. The most excellent of men is the mighty warrior, also called a mighty one. He's referred to as the most excellent men. Another translation says the most handsome inside and out. And at one point I was the most handsome outside. I'll always be the most handsome inside. The most, and thanks to God and so on and so forth, just telling the facts here, not being cocky or anything like that. So, yeah, so when you couple Psalm 45 with Genesis 10, it's saying that Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior. Again, the mighty warrior, the mighty one, the most excellent of men, who became the most handsome of men, the most excellent of men, the wisest of men, because what martial arts requires. What does it take to be the greatest warrior, right? If you're all strong and no brains, you do one strong blow, someone dodges it and cuts your head off, no time flat. So it takes a certain wisdom. The martial art principles are the life principles. That's why they're bothering to say that. And they're bringing up how it also makes him a mighty hunter, because again, he hunts those wicked, those unclean birds and those unclean animals, like the jackal and the owl is talked about in the Bible, and the brood of vipers and the wolves. Okay, that's why it's brought up that way.